Welcome to Warblog. Today we're going to look at this Maryamin scenario. Oh look, I clicked it before I even realised. It's a bit misleading really, because it's not really Maryamin at all. And there it is there, Maryamin. I don't know why it's called that, because the Syrian forces aren't quite there, but they were there, or they were driving towards there, and then they got sort of hit by some artillery from the Turkish sort of side, which I suppose if they were there, 1, 2, 3, 4, they could get hit. I was wondering where the artillery would have come from, but there's none in range really. But we can assume there might be some, maybe here, coming down a bit. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's quite interesting, and that's why I'm going to do this. But I'm going to limit myself to half an hour because I sort of want to start uploading to the daily website and realise that if it's over half an hour, I think it's too long. So I'm going to keep it down. Well, no one really watches my videos anyway, especially not hour-long ones. So basically, I'm sort of doing this because well, there's a few reasons really, but basically it's sort of interesting. It's Afrin. So Afrin is sort of here, and you can just sort of see massively the top of it there. So there's Turkey there, obviously Turkey down here, Turkey over here. There's some sort of I don't know who's here actually. I put the FSA there, but they're sort of Turkey affiliates, I think, sort of as a result of the operation, whatever it was, to create a buffer zone along their border. I can't remember what it was called actually. Euphrates, Operation Euphrates, I think. So this is called Operation Olive Branch actually, and there's been quite a few sort of scenarios from this, particular about this sort of section here. Let me get the drawing tool out. Sort of this little bit here, this little bit here. This bit here, so to speak. Not so sure. This is more of a static line, so that's been sort of static for a while. So I don't know what a line for static is, but that's static. They've also sort of taken a huge chunk out of there that I didn't really notice them do. They've done a little bit here, and they're heading towards the sort of Raqqa area, and there's not so much there, but they're taking little chunks out here. And if you look at the map, it sort of looks a little more accurate than this does. So this is based on sort of the current state of play on the whatever it was, the 20th of February, and so they're basically moving in to create a buffer zone between Turkey and the Kurds, the YPG. They're considered to be sort of either terrorists or supporting terrorists. So they're trying to sort of build up. So essentially, if you were to, because this is all sort of pretty much Turkish control. These are sort of Turkish-backed militants, basically. So they're looking to basically probably just convert all of that to create this as sort of, you know, all Turkish-controlled. And so they're taking little bits out here. So you know, you can imagine that after a while they'll probably be there, and then they'll take that out, pushing them back. The last thing that I read was that they're expected to move. Did I move that? I didn't mean to move anything. Anyway, basically, what I think is that the Turkish army is going to move this way into Afrin. But at the same time, what we have is Syria. Now, these are like militants there, so they're non-combatants. The Syrian portion at the moment is like that, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get there as well, but they're more sort of trying to protect their. I don't know what they're doing really. I think they're protecting their interests in, you know, sort of real estate, as opposed to sort of allowing the Turkish to sort of take that sort of control. It's all a bit vague, and I'm really into it too much. I just sort of browse and read a bit here and there, but what they've done is they tried to move up here, and obviously they got, or some of the some of the units that went there were targeted by artillery, and then they pulled back. But Tell Rifaat has just, which was held by the YPG, has now handed itself over to the Syrian army. So elements of this, including in Aleppo, which is sort of, in that direction, are, basically giving up power to the Syrian government in one form or another. I'm not sure how that works, but if Afrin, which is there, they've actually had pro-government rallies, and I think what they're saying is we don't want to be bombed to bits rallies, because there's a lot of damage going on down here, and people will have their interests at stake, and I'm pretty sure that people would rather have peace. Really, I think that's generally what's going on. And so they're saying, well, we want the Syrian army to come in, but the Turkish they're sort of hammering the YPG, and they're saying anyone with them is going to be a legitimate target. So it sort of depends really on how it all works out. So we've got two scenarios really. We've got one where the Syrian government will basically come in, and all the YPG elements will basically hand over control and power to the Syrians because they don't want any more conflict, and it'll all end up quite peaceably. The Turkish have clearly demonstrated their capability to attack and make ground, as they've been doing here, and it's clear that they'll be able to continue doing that. And so what they're saying is, would you rather lose everything to the Turkish, or would you rather have some protection and maybe coexist and maybe maintain some of your interests with the Syrians? I don't know what they're saying. Let's just be guessing. But what I'm saying is that would be maybe a peaceable solution. Or the other side of the coin is that the Syrians and the Turks really start to sort of fight each other, and I think there's a lot of, in East Ghouta the Russians are sort of adding their weight to it as well, and East Ghouta is more controversial, I think, and that's what I'm going to be doing next. It's interesting that these things are happening sort of at the same time, but. So I don't know. One of the things that I get not so much frustrated about, but it's a fun little frustrating, is the whenever you read these news things, it's sort of like breaking news. The beginning of Third World War, and I can't really see. It's been going on for so long now. They must be tired. They must be tired of war and all that. And when you look at it, it just seems so sort of bizarre that it can be happening, especially in East Ghouta. What's happening there at the moment. So I can't really see this being anything other than some kind of, I think it will peter out, as sort of both sides, establish a bit of this or a bit of that. There wasn't really too much in the Euphrates. It was really more of a case of who got where first. So there might be a bit of a race, but whether there's a race for Afrin, or whether Afrin cedes immediately to the Syrians or whatever. So that's that really. So I'm not going to talk any more about that. I want to keep it under 30 minutes because I want to upload it to this Daily Motion site or whatever as a video. Nothing special really, but I tried to upload my other one and it says your video is too long. So I want to at least plonk something up there every now and then. Like I said, no one watches all my videos. Do little dots like that. Something to laugh. So, but the next thing to possibly just mention again is the complexity of it all. Now, the map, I think, looks nicer without the units on it. It's got lots of things that you can look at. When you put the units on it, it all looks a bit more of a mess. But it's definitely interesting. It fits into sort of the thing that I keep ranting about and raving about. Is that, well, a map like this, it all looks very clever, but this would take forever. This would take a long time to play, and so what you'd be trying to do is to get to Afrin first. And I'm not sure whether or not that would be a good scenario, but however you wanted to play it, whether you really want to play the Turks and take out all these. I'm not sure whether the Turkish and the could take out the combined might of the YPG and the Syrians. I don't know, But it's a game, so you'd be able to play that and see how well you do. But it's a colossal game. But I think, again, if you sort of take it back to some of the early things I said, this could be a scenario in its own right. And this one here, which is, there's Radjo. So we've already done that. I mean, this is the scenario. I'm going to go and show it in a minute. It's about like that. So if you consider that square, that's that. So, I mean, that's what's sort of happening. So there's the FSA, there's the Turks. Radjo's sort of just up here somewhere. I've actually done this one and started playing it, and there's the road that you can sort of see. The terrain is probably slightly different because I'm never really that sort of perfect on the terrain. But the thing is, this is just one little scenario. It's a scenario in its own right. And when you consider that this is just a mass of lots of little scenarios, so we've got the Raqqa thing there, we've got whatever's going on up here. We've got all this stuff over here. We've got this stuff here. We've got these front lines here. Each one of these could be a scenario. And what you're being asked to do here, to some extent, even this, the race to Maryamin and Afrin, could be a scenario in its own right, like that. We've got this conflict down here, which could similarly be all segmented and played differentially. And so you've got all these sort of elements to consider, and we're not going to do them right now because I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, well, we've got these units here, these in there, and we're going to do this and this. It all suddenly becomes a lot more, crowded, and I prefer the more segmented sections, so you can sort of say, well, this is the Raqqa thing, and you can play that in isolation against the complexity of everything else. I mean, but the thing about this is, one of the things that's appealing and interesting about just the geography of Afrin is the fact that it's surrounded pretty much. So you've got a full force surrounding. Go from there. Let's draw the line up there, like that. It really is an enclave, or a whatever you want to call it. What's that other word? I can't even remember them. I don't want to even try it. This is like a blob where you've got something like that. And then you can basically attack it there or there, etc., etc. Done a few other games where I do this. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. The point is, it's a very distinctive sort of scenario. I mean, to put it into perspective, perhaps another way is, and I haven't really thought about this, but it's always dawned on me that I could possibly, and let's just do a whole map of Syria. I mean, Syria's not actually very big, and just do the whole thing. But it's just too big and vast. There's too much going on, and movement would be too sort of grand. I think that's one of the problems you get with a grand scenario or a grand campaign, or even a grand game like this, is that what's actually happening down there suddenly becomes out of balance and out of proportion to what is actually really happening. Even just sort of considering what we've got, I mean, just to sort of look around here and say, well, what can we do? I mean, we've got this little pocket here. Well, we could start moving into there, but you sort of say, well, okay, well, I mean, you're really playing, I mean, who are you playing here at the moment? You're probably playing the chief of staff of the Turkish army. I mean, I'm just going to Google head of Turkish army, see who it is. Turkish Armed Forces. Okay, well, obviously the Commander-in-Chief is President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which is actually the Prime Minister, so I don't think he counts. The Chief of General Staff is General Hulusi Akar. Then we've got the Minister of National Defence. So General Hulusi Akar and the Minister Nurettin Canikli are probably sitting there at this moment, and they'll be having a report on what have we got in this stack here? They want a full report. And what have we got here? And then a balanced report against what is around here. And then they'll be signing off an operational advance into one of these hexes. And it's all very detailed. And you can have a lot of time and thought that goes into just that little couple of hexes there. And that's why I like to sort of split them out. It's just too big. I mean, this is a grand campaign. You could spend a lot of time playing this as a scenario, and here it's a lot easier to sort of actually deal with that one issue, that one thing down here, the race for to Raqqa or whatever. You know, we could play that now in a different scale. So what we're trying to do here is get from here, which is there, basically, to so we're trying to get from here to here with our Turkish forces coming around. So, you know, this is two hexes, obviously on a different scale. But here it sort of comes, okay, well, how are we going to be able to do this? Well, what about, so what we've not got in this picture is the efforts to maintain a line there, going from there, because it's not the game, I can't do the drawing tool, but from there down here. I mean, what is going on over here? And this encompasses that. So, you know, this is in isolation, and you would think that there's nothing else in the world to you know, these forces don't have to maintain their integrity to deal with other things. So here, they're obviously pushing for Rajo or Raqqa, and, you know, we could do that so easily, but, you know, just sort of considering that as an issue, and how it might be done. So we've got air power. We don't have any artillery around this area. Oh, we've got some Turkish artillery there. So we could sort of say, well, do we want to get that artillery in a better position? What are the roads like? We could move there, 1, 2, 3. We've got to defend. So what about this little thing jutting out there? I mean, do we have to take that out first? You know, if this is going to face off that, and this is going to face off that, how much of this is spare to move up against that? I think we can safely move them there. I got the wrong turn. I think I might... Who's going first in this game? I think the Syrians are going first. No, we've been playing the wrong one. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's play the Syrians now. Because it's the Syrian turn, look, not the Turkish turn. I should have spotted that with the counters. So anyway, what we're trying to do here, well, what we can do here is one thing that we definitely did historically. We can move into Tell Rifaat and conquer it, because they have now given their allegiance to the Syrian army. And let's just move these guys out of the way. Let's see how far we can move this unit. We can get up to there, so we can probably move most of that to there. Now here, because we're now assuming that there is some cooperation, we could sort of maybe move these and commit these either this way or this way, you know, and sort of create at least a buffer zone. I mean, obviously this is a front line that's going to try and defend itself, but it looks a bit thin there, especially if the main force comes from there, to actually create something, and then in the meantime move these Syrian forces a little further. But if it's a race to Afrin, if that's what it is, how fast can we get there? What have we got? Mechanized. far are you going to move along this track, through the hills? One movement through hills along a track. Two. So it's going to be very slow going. I like it when it's slow going. So we've got our Syrian forces moving very slowly towards Afrin, and these units essentially doing their best to block the Turkish advance. Well, we've got a lot more coming in here. Obviously we know we can get all that up to there. We've got with 3. See if the roads were better. Would it be better to go up this road and then back down? I mean, from there, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It would be quicker to go all the way around. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'd be there at 5. We might have a bit more room because it's agricultural to move in. But I mean, the point in principle, you know, the roads actually do make a difference. But that's it. I'm not going to really go on much further. I just wanted to sort of touch base with this game because it's such a big one and it's so interesting, and it is current. I'm always a bit cautious about doing the current ones, you know, because it's sort of you know, I don't want to be leveraging on a bandwagon on this is current. One of the reasons I sort of got to grips with this to some extent was because I was just browsing through and I can't remember what brought my attention to it, but I was looking at basically Mosul for some reason, and you know, these are 2016, and I was thinking, well, that was quite, you know, that's quite a big and involved one, and it's quite a nice map as well, and quite interesting, and it suddenly becomes a historic precedent, you know. So there's no sort of, this is not hot off the press anymore, you know. So it's not a case of this is hot off the press, but in order to get that detail, in order to get that situation and scenario, I had to be there at the time. And you know, that caught me in the sense that I thought, well, you know, that actually makes it quite different. I mean, this is it from a very different perspective. But there's another one called, I think it was the Road to Raqqa, actually. Let's see what we've got. The Road to Raqqa. And I was looking at this one, and it was sort of like, well, this is just a snapshot from a moment in time in 2016, and that's what this is. You know, so it's sort of, I like to do them, you know, in real time, but it's sort of, it's a lot harder to do them, you know, in the past, participle, so to speak. And when you consider, well, what I wanted to do there was just sort of, it's becoming, what I'm sort of trying to get to, it's becoming sort of what I wanted it to do. It's become a vast resource of information that is, you know, to some extent historically relevant and significant. You know, this will become a part of history. This is history in the making. Whether or not it goes, as I said at the start, whether or not they basically come to some kind of arrangement to, you know, pacify the interests of the Turks and, you know, bring about peace, so to speak, or whether this turns out to be something, where that involves, conflict between the Turks and the Syrians, and then, the Israelis and the Americans and the Russians and the Iranians. We've got all these participants, and it just amazes me. It really does, that there's just so much happening, and it's odd really, because I sit there thinking, well, knowing my luck, if I start a blog on war, I don't think quite like this, but it's a sort of reversed engineered thought. If I start a blog on war, all war will stop. And if you think about it, there aren't really any wars at the moment. If this war in Syria stopped, there wouldn't be anything to blog about. Not that I'm blogging, I have to blog. I'm not like that. I just go and do some historic ones, or, the last thing you really want to think about is just sort of sitting there waiting for people to start killing each other so that you can create games about it. That's not how I roll. But, when you start to think about, what's actually happening, it all becomes quite insensible, really. I mean, there's Ukraine, but that's it. We've got a little bit of, militant terrorist activity in, Libya and Egypt. Obviously there are places that tentatively called war zones. I mean, if you look at one of the sites, it calls Scotland a war zone because they're trying to secede for independence, which is complete nonsense. So, but they're definitely shelling each other in in Kashmir, India and Pakistan, and but there's no real blatant wars. There's nothing like this. There's no sort of Boko Haram advance on major African state, etc., etc. And I think we're going to generally move towards a period of peace. And as I say, it's sort of like something where I start a blog, and sod's law, the world comes to a unquestionable and long-term peace. It's just my luck, really. It's often difficult talking about things like that, but I just say it as it is. So, but anyway, I'm not going to do much more. Obviously, you can see it's a big game. There's a lot to it. I brought about the difference between this and the much smaller snapshot of them. I prefer doing it like this, but there's also the appeal to sitting down and thinking, right, I'm going to spend an entire weekend playing this scenario, and it'd be fascinating to see what the objectives are, because one thing I do not know is the overall balance, whether or not there's actually enough units to actually do what you might want to do. I've no idea. I just like sprinkle the units on like hundreds and thousands, and hopefully it will prove useful. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that, and keep it under 30 minutes, so upload it to Daily Motion, whatever it's called, at least, and I'll speak to you later. Cheerio, bye.